what the Hive call a god.
Crotas End will return with the upcoming season of Destiny 2, and there's only many issues with this. The raid would be incredibly easy in its current state, and you know there's some changes that need to happen with Crota when the overwhelming majority of players call Crota a dungeon, a strike, even a lost sector. Solo Crota became one of the largest memes over time, and in honor of it, the footage you're watching is me casually soloing him from a stream where Skarrow9 and I were roasting the poor guy. I think I know my raids and what needs changing for them to stay just as memorable while adding some new mechanics in the realm of possibility. I brought on a special guest to help go through some of the changes and what he would like to see as well.
Hey everyone, it's Skarrow. Thanks for hanging out, and let's talk about some Crotas End.
Crota has to look like a home improvement job to make it special again, and without sacrificing its key moments. So let's begin, and make sure you join me and CB Gray on Raid Zone September 1st at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern for the full coverage of the world's first raid race, and we're also going to be helping a bunch of people through after the race is over. So we'll be doing a 24-hour stream, giving away a ton of stuff and just having fun, man. This is the third world's first I'm doing in a suit. All right, that's 3 world's firsts for me. I can't wait to cast another banger event, so make sure you guys are there. The landscape here is pretty iconic. In the original raid, this was one giant labyrinth with a twisting and hilly path, eventually to a final plate to tap and defend. There were all sorts of cheeses in the original. We're talking lamps booping you to the ending, blinking past the whole floor, and after tapping the plate, you just hang out on a rock where the thrall couldn't grab you. This ended with a sprint into a CSGO flashbang room and on to the other encounter. This room also had a random exotic chest and one of the many optional doors to explore. But the main parts that made this work here were the endless thrall chasing you in the pits of the Hellmouth, and the many holes you could fall in. If you played the swamp on the Lightblade strike, you've played Crota's End lamp encounter. This encounter needs stakes, and we're not talking about ribeyes here. We can do this by upping the intensity of thralls and knights. Look guys, we have weapons like Forbearance that can clear an entire wave of thrall while healing you in the process, and can create a bunch of orbs. We also have well skating and eager edge in general, so the encounter would be a breeze in the current day of Destiny. I recommend the best way to update this is to add moths and light hive to the encounter. Moths don't care about your feelings, and they don't care about your healing either. They're there to make you pee your pants and make you have a horrible time, and I'm all for that. I also feel more alternate pathing would benefit the maze-like functionality of this encounter. If you've played D1, then you know the path of the maze very well. Updating the course would at least add a new element to the raid. Obviously, the end of the encounter shouldn't allow people to sit on a little rock and avoid danger, so make sure the team has to be on the plate for progress to continue, while upping the stakes with some meaningful enemies attacking. Finally, the sprint to the finish could also use a surprise. We're talking something like an unstoppable ogre or a light hive in here. I think this encounter of Crota has my lightest amount of changes because it's a pretty solid one outside of the cheese ability. Since we know that challenge mode will be here in round 2 of this raid, we know we're gonna have to have some possibilities for challenge mode. My first challenge, every single lamp has to be blown up or nobody can get off the ending plate no matter what to complete it. Skarrow?
I think the biggest change to lanterns needs to be a higher emphasis on team play. In Destiny 1, everyone knows you could just have one solo hunter go clear the entire thing super easily. But to bring this up to the standards of Destiny 2 raids, I think there needs to be some sort of mechanic to force you to bring most of your team through, or at least multiple members of your team through. So the concept I keep coming back to is, imagine if this raid was you charging up the Sword of Crota in a similar way that Vow of the Disciple was just you bringing Rolk's glaive to him to awaken him. And so let's say you drop down into the Hellmouth and there's kind of like a dead Crota sword there, like it just is super weak, it slows you down, it doesn't get the super something like that. And you have to work with your team to bring it all the way through the lanterns. Maybe it gives you some sort of slow debuff, or it adds stacks of some sort of debuff. Once you hit a certain amount, it forces you to drop the sword. And so this this way, you would be forced to work with your teammates to constantly be passing the sword around while fighting off onslaughts of just these, thrall enemies and maybe hive moths and stuff like that, and making your way through the maze. I think that could be really fun and just a way to force you to bring more than just one invisible hunter all the way through this encounter, because that doesn't feel like a raid. That feels kind of like a dungeon, to be completely honest. Now, for the bridge encounter, for me, this one's kind of hard just due to the nature of the encounter. When I sit down and I think about like what the bridge encounter is trying to accomplish, I think it would be really hard to expand on that concept as it currently exists. I just think if you add different aspects, it would either just get like really tedious or convoluted or not fun. So I'm not really sure how they could evolve the base idea, but I'm excited to see what they do. At the base, I think it would need to have the 6-sword fiasco ending from Age of Triumph. That was just so much fun, and just, slamming a ton of blue knights with swords was just awesome with friends. So I hope to see that back. The only other thing I could think of adding is some sort of additional maybe timing mechanic. So think about like with Galron, you had the main team that was doing stuff, and then everyone else who was waiting their turn had smaller mechanics to go and do. Enemies to kill, hands to shoot, that sort of thing. And so maybe you could have it so the people that are waiting across the bridge, they have to maybe shoot hive symbols in some sort of order or kill specific enemies that aren't the sword knight. Something like that to just keep them entertained while everyone else is shuttling across the bridge. That's really all I can think of. They also, of course, should put a death wall in the middle so you can't just skate across, but we'll see what they do there. Now for the challenge, this one's kind of hard. Maybe you can't pick up a sword until everyone has, and so it's kind of like the Destiny 1 Golgoroth Gaze challenge, maybe. But other than that, I'm just hoping that we see some form of transformation of this encounter that I'm not really expecting, and that will play into the challenge.
The bridge has a lot of potential to be a great encounter. In the original raid, this encounter had the goal of crossing the bridge by having 2 players hold under the totems while one held the bridge, and a 4th teammate grabbed a sword from a sword-bearer knight. Having the sword in hand allowed safe passage across the bridge, and the goal was to kill a blue gatekeeper knight. Just use the sword to kill one. Once you had 3 players across, the other side was mirrored to the starting side, so you just needed to hold the bridge for your teammates who were on their own. I liked this encounter because it called for your best players to cross first and last, but unfortunately, it has many flaws and cheese. I'm gonna try to fix that, and for starters, both sides of the map needs to have threat and presence. Think close towers filled with knights shooting you down and risk of you crossing the bridge. The bridge forming needs some extra spice to it. In the current state, it's more basic than the Totems remaster. So I think a mechanic of crossing back and forth, killing gatekeepers and sword bearers on each side is best. After 3, have them spawn in different parts of the bridge to call upon more team play. Sword bearers need to have more steps to kill them, or some sort of shield to break. Potentially interacting with the totems are a way to charge an ability, building stacks to break the sword knight shield that you can do damage to him. This would make it so totems weren't always needed to be held by adding some utility to them. Finally, it would be nice to add a light hive here, but I can settle for champions. This part could really up the intensity as less people are on the starting side. Bungie has a lot to think about with this encounter. My challenge here is going to be called 2 Knights, 1 Sword. Save 2 Knights to half health and finish them off in 3 to 5 seconds of each other. There is only one jumping puzzle in Crota's End, and it's a hallway with transparent walls that need shriekers to die to get through. For an added challenge of speed, you could go fast and grab a chest before the door closed, but it was really just a challenge before Ur-Yut for some loot. This whole thing has potential to be completely redone, changed, and then added with new stakes. Bungie, if you want Crota Day 1 to last longer and be a truly special Day 1 raid, I need you to add a massive puzzle here. Just do it. Just do it. Bungie experimented with Hive Rune puzzles in the Season of the Lost and in the Witch Queen campaign. Expand on this and make a truly remarkable puzzle, and people will always remember this little drop down. If you wanted to do something simpler yet memorable, create a new jumping puzzle that adds depth to get to Ur-Yut. Everyone, self included, wants some sort of jumping puzzle or puzzles added. Every other raid has a bunch of jumping puzzles compared to Crota. This one is just encounter after encounter, so you need to break up the tension.
Yeah, I totally agree with Evan on this one. I think a large part of why Crota's End feels so short is because of general lack of traversal sections. I mean, it's kind of 4 encounters. It's sort of like 3 encounters and whatever the heck Death Singer is. But, you know, it's kind of the average length for a raid nowadays. But there are no traversal sections, or very limited traversal sections, which means you are just banging out these encounters one after another, and it makes it go super fast. And so I know Bungie typically doesn't like to change the raid that much with these reprisals, so I'm not sure what they are willing to do or think they're allowed to do, but I think some sort of extra jumping puzzle or traversal section would go a pretty long way in making the raid feel pretty fresh, but also making it feel more raid worthy. So that's just something I hope to see as well. Now, Death Singer in Destiny 1 was barely an encounter. I pretty much equate it to the version of Gatekeepers in Vault of Glass in Destiny 1. And so all you did is you came into this room, which was the Crota's final boss room, but you had to do the phase 1 because every Destiny 1 raid typically had a phase 1 to the boss fight. And so that was kind of Death Singer and introduced you to the space. But to be honest, in Destiny 1, this was barely even an encounter. There were a couple of enemies that you had to kill on each side. The Death Singer room would be opened, and then you had to go kill her. And she had 0 health. She was pretty much a basic wizard. And the only sort of mechanic is that she was singing her death song, and you had to do this entire thing, which was kill like 5 enemies before she completed her death song. It was barely an encounter, to be completely honest. And so I think here, Bungie has a huge chance to make the biggest impact on the entire raid. If you give this encounter kind of the VoG 2.0 Gatekeeper treatment, where you take a non-encounter and you turn it into a full-blown, really well-executed part of the raid, I think it could actually potentially transform how people see Crota's End. So I want them to make Yrute an actual boss with actual DPS phases and some mechanics. I think that would be very fun and interesting. I would also love it if she got her own room, so instead of just using kind of the Crota End boss arena. But once again, I'm not really sure what Bungie thinks they are allowed to do to these reprised raids. Both King's Fall and Vault of Glass have been pretty true to the original in terms of layout and format, just with some changes to the encounters. And so if they're doing that, then of course Yrute would still just be in this room. But once again, I think giving her own like space to exist in, maybe in that hallway before this encounter, would go a long way in making the raid feel longer, because you're not spending half the raid in one room. But I think Bungie has a really huge opportunity here to make this an awesome encounter, and I'd love to see the current raid and dungeon teams take on it, because I think that could be really cool.
I just think the boss needs to be a boss. Yrute is one unique encounter, with speedrunning the ads and rooms being the main challenge. But the boss is a pushover. I love the idea of a timer, but the boss needs to be more challenging, more twists. Arena just can't be only ads. We're way too strong for that. Yrute needs a shield. Teleportation to different sides of the arena. She knows she can Shadow Wizard money gang us away, so make her follow through with that and move her around. I think Champions and Light Hive could be the mini bosses added to the sides before you can fight her, but this one needs to be ripped and redone from the inside out. My challenge, should this be a redesign, is to block the teleports if she has them. This needs to be a puzzly challenge like Gatekeepers were for VoG's remaster, and these I could realistically see happening. Crota! Crota's entrance was legendary. The portal, the appearance, and the wave were all great, but Crota, you gotta be completely redone. This encounter had the Chalice of Light, which needed to be passed around to be able to heal each other. This encounter also had a Swordbearer Knight that spawned in the center, dropped a sword for one player, and wouldn't respawn until a damage phase was over. To damage Crota, the team needed to time lowering the shield of Crota with the player who has the sword, so they can be dealing damage once Crota took a knee and the shield was gone. After the halfway point, 2 ogres spawned in, and you had to kill them in the side rooms. If a player died, the Oversoul spawned in, and you had to break it or you wiped. Pretty simple, right? Now in Age of Triumph, the Oversoul was updated to proc every time Crota took a knee, just to be more team-oriented. This encounter would get obliterated by today's game for many reasons. Aside from pulling the router and watching Crota stay on one knee, the entire Chalice healing mechanic needs to be redone. We have Wells of Radiance, we have healing grenades, we have Forbearance, we have healing mods. Healing is built into everything we do. So The Chalice of Light, let's scrap that idea. What I recommend is taking a page from Skull Loss for the Chalice. In Skull Loss, you had to pass the essence around from player to player with a lockout timer before it could be picked up by another player. This required coordination of the room and in order to get the job done. If Skull Loss's essence timer ran out, you died. And I believe the same should be here. But even more punishing, wipe the encounter if the timer runs out. I also believe the encounter needs to become more team involved for damage and should allow risk reward for going for the challenge of it. Kill a bunch of sword bearers and let Crota have up to 6 swords for damage if you want them. This allows for that risk reward. At the risk, you'd get all ran by the shield portion. Crota should have free roam in all parts of the arena. It would be a funny twist if he could just hop up. My final change is the Oversoul. It's fine to be a strong counter to someone dying, but it should just frequently pop up for the added torment and really make you careful to pick up 6 swords for Crota, if that change goes through. I think besides some tougher enemies around the arena, it would add to it. But Crota, just like Uryut, is going to need a lot of change.
Now, to be honest, for Crota, my changes are pretty minimal. I think this fight doesn't need a lot other than just making it a little bit more involved and a little bit more interesting. So, for my number 1 change, I want to see them reverse how this encounter worked in Destiny 1. In Destiny 1, you used rockets to bring Crota down to his knee, and then a singular person used a sword to do damage. I think that this kind of needs the treatment that Oryx got, where you get to actually do DPS to Crota, and that way you can, one phase it or optimize and do this raid a little bit faster, and it actually feels like you have some sort of control over how long this fight takes, instead of always just having to use a sword with a, set amount of damage per hit. So I think how they could very easily do this is flip it. So multiple swords spawn, and you have to work together with your team somehow to use them to get Crota down, to break his shield so he's down on his knee, and then you use weapons to do actual DPS. And so instead of using weapons and then sword, it just kind of flips on its head, and you use sword to activate the DPS phase, where you have to optimize with your team to do as much DPS as possible with your actual loadouts and weapons and things like that. I think that could be pretty interesting. I'd also love to see them tie the Oversoul a little bit more into the encounter, but I don't really have a lot of guesses for that. I just think in general, this fight could use a little bit more breadth to it. Instead of, kill a knight, grab a sword, hit Crota, boom. Maybe add a pre-phase to it where you have to do some sort of mechanic first before the Sword Knight spawns, and that sort of thing. I would just love to see them make this encounter a little bit longer and a little bit more worthy of being called a raid encounter. Now for the challenge, maybe something to do with the Oversoul or the swords, but to be honest, I don't know, because I don't know how much they would change this encounter if they brought it back. There were also those knights that spawned in the corner towers during or right before DPS phase in Destiny 1, and so I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that those get incorporated into the challenge. Maybe you have to kill them in X time limit or leave them all alive or something like that. I think that could be pretty interesting as well.
I believe for my challenge that all 6 players should have to hit Crota with a sword at least once. It's not the most fun challenge, but it is a challenge I could see realistically happening. Overall, Crota needs a lot of changes, and a lot more creativity on the changes than the other raids. Vogue and Kingsfall were pretty predictable in terms of the changes, while Crota, not as much. Let me know what you think and what you would change. And thank you for watching, and until next time, I'll see you out there. Bye, guys.